the Mahabharata Weapon. In 3102 BC, during the climactic Kurukshetra war described in the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, a devastating weapon was unleashed on the battlefield. This event, according to ancient Indian texts, did not resemble any known warfare of its time. Instead, it was something far more terrifying. The passage reads with disturbing clarity. A single projectile was launched, glowing with the brightness of 10,000 suns. It produced searing heat, blinding light, and a shockwave that toppled elephants and chariots in a radius of miles. Birds ignited mid-flight, rivers boiled, the earth trembled beneath the feet of warriors. What was once a strategic battlefield was transformed, in seconds, into a wasteland of scorched earth and melted sand. But this was not a modern war. According to the text, it occurred in an age when metallurgy was primitive and armies fought with swords, spears, and bows. Yet the Mahabharata describes effects eerily similar to a nuclear detonation. Survivors who returned from the blast zone experienced hair loss, skin peeling, and mysterious illnesses, symptoms that uncannily mirror radiation poisoning. Horses and livestock nearby were said to collapse without wounds, their internal organs liquefied. Modern researchers, especially in the mid-20th century, began drawing parallels between these verses and the aftermath of atomic bombings. In 1945, just after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, American physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer was asked if the Trinity test was the first nuclear explosion in history. His chilling response, yes, in modern times. Archaeological studies in the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, located in present-day Pakistan, unearthed ruins showing skeletons lying hand-in-hand in the streets, some with radiation levels over 50 times higher than normal. Nearby, layers of glassified sand suggested exposure to extreme heat, possibly thousands of degrees, for which no volcanic or natural explanation was found. Despite these anomalies, no official investigations were launched. No scientific panels were formed. Indian authorities sealed off sections of excavation zones. Western academic circles largely dismissed the claims as metaphorical or exaggerated poetic license. Over time, whispers of nuclear warfare in the ancient world faded into the background noise of conspiracy theories. But if the Mahabharata's description aligns so precisely with modern nuclear effects, then who or what possessed such power over 5,000 years ago? Could it be that ancient civilizations accessed knowledge now lost to us? Or was this story the mythologized memory of a real event, passed down through centuries, veiled in the language of gods and demons? Satellite imagery of the Kurukshetra region shows no crater, no blast zone, nothing to suggest such a catastrophe, and yet the text remains, unchanged, detailed, specific, as if someone, somewhere, wanted the memory preserved. If the weapon described in the Mahabharata was real, then our understanding of technological history is fundamentally flawed, a truth that may have been erased, not forgotten. The Egyptian flying boat. In 1240 BC, inside the walls of the temple of Seti I at Abydos, Egyptologists uncovered a series of carvings that defied conventional interpretation. Among them, one glyph caught the world's attention, a detailed image that resembled nothing less than a flying machine. With a long fuselage, rounded cockpit, and symmetrical wings, it bore an uncanny resemblance to a modern aircraft. But this was only the beginning. Ancient Egyptian texts, particularly those found in the Pyramid texts and later in the Book of the Dead, refer repeatedly to the Boat of Ra, a vessel made of fire and light that crossed the sky during the hours of darkness. This celestial ship was not poetic imagery. According to the inscriptions, it emitted sounds of thunder, tore through the clouds, and was seen descending upon the earth, riding on winds not of this world. One translation describes the ship as glowing with gold and flame, its presence shaking the very ground as it passed. Priests recorded accounts of columns of light descending from it, and villagers who claimed to have witnessed it were often taken by temple guards for questioning, or never seen again. The so-called solar bark was not depicted merely as symbolic transport of the gods, but as a real, powerful object that altered the environment and inspired awe. In 1891, British explorer and mystic H. Carter documented an obscure papyrus fragment found near Luxor. The fragment, now lost, reportedly described a metallic ark, shaped not like a boat, but like the wing of a great bird, which spoke in tones that shattered stone. While many dismissed the text as apocryphal, Carter himself insisted it was authentic, later noting in his journal that the priests feared the sky-born things more than they feared death. Fast forward to modern Egyptology. The debate remains polarizing. Mainstream scholars interpret these texts and carvings as stylized symbolism, perhaps distorted by centuries of copying and erosion. But others suggest that a deeper narrative is being overlooked, one in which the gods did not merely represent forces of nature, but were remembered as beings that descended from the sky in technological craft, later deified through millennia of myth-making. Complicating matters further is the phenomenon of palimpsest carving, where older reliefs are scraped away and new inscriptions etched over them. Some researchers argue that the most aircraft-like images at Abydos were created unintentionally by overlapping layers of glyphs, but this explanation doesn't account for the textual descriptions, independently preserved over centuries, of a vessel that moved without sails, wind, or water. What's more, early Coptic Christian texts, written over 1,000 years later, still refer to the fire chariot of Ra and warn that its return would signal the end of the current age. Even in their adapted theology, the memory of something unnatural crossing the skies endured. If the flying boat was just metaphor, why did it need guards? Why did its appearance shake buildings and instill terror? And why are there no comparable metaphors of sky vessels and other river civilizations of the same era? The idea that ancient Egypt merely imagined these encounters becomes harder to defend when one studies the consistency, reverence, and terror associated with this so-called boat. Perhaps the gods never sailed the Nile. Perhaps they flew far above it. The Sumerian Sky Gate. Around 2100 BC, deep in the ancient city of Nippur, archaeologists unearthed a series of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform that belonged to the earliest written texts of human civilization. Among them was a passage that stood apart, not in its language, but in its implications. It described a structure called the Dur-an-Ki, literally translated as the bond between heaven and earth. To most scholars, this was interpreted as a poetic metaphor, but the rest of the text refused to conform. It described a place of meeting where the gods descended and returned, accessible only by passing through a door of light, surrounded by a vibrating hum. It stood on a land where no wind blows, where the soil is dry yet never dusty, and where no bird takes flight. A land not made by hands, suspended beneath the vault of the stars. More than myth, the text outlined detailed procedures for approaching the structure, specific chants, timing by celestial alignment, and isolation rituals. The priest who entered was said to be changed forever, sometimes never returning. The description echoes initiation rites, but it also hints at something else, contact with a force or dimension beyond the physical. Further texts from the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Etana echo similar themes: journeys into the sky, visitors from above, and structures that shimmered in the desert without casting shadows. One clay tablet, now preserved in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, even depicts a stepped platform surrounded by radiant beams and guarded by animal-human hybrids. Some interpret this as a stylized ziggurat, others as an ancient launch pad of sorts. The most chilling element appears in the Gudea cylinders, a pair of inscriptions describing King Gudea of Lagash receiving instructions in a dream from a being who shines like burnished bronze, telling him how to build an Engin, a temple designed to connect heaven and earth. The being described a chamber of meeting where the stars moved closer and light flowed like water. This language, ancient, cryptic, yet strangely evocative of electromagnetic or gravitational phenomena, doesn't match the tone of religious ritual. It suggests direct observation, physical experience, memory. Modern scholars generally dismiss these accounts as spiritual allegories or metaphors for astronomical tracking, but others point out the repeated references to actual physical structures, ones not yet located, but described in coordinates relative to constellations and equinoxes. And unlike other myths, these stories don't end in tragedy or divine punishment. They end in silence, as if something was shut down, hidden, or erased. Worse, many of the sites associated with these tablets are now inaccessible due to conflict zones, looting, or permanent military presence. Some suspect the restrictions are for heritage protection. Others believe something more valuable, or dangerous, lies beneath the sands. If a gateway truly existed, a portal or station described by the oldest civilization on Earth, then why is it mentioned across multiple epochs, in consistent detail, with rituals more procedural than religious? And if it was merely metaphor, why does it still feel like a warning? The giant from the sky. In 467 BC, near the city of Phanagoria, along the eastern edge of the Black Sea, an earthquake exposed a cavern that had remained sealed for centuries. Inside, local farmers uncovered fragments of a strange scroll, one not written on traditional parchment or papyrus, but on treated hide, darkened and hardened. This document, later translated by scholars in the court of Pericles, described an event that was as awe-inspiring as it was horrifying. The scroll told of a thing from the stars, shaped like a man, falling in fire. It did not descend slowly like a god from Mount Olympus, but crashed violently into the earth, creating a massive crater that glowed for 3 days and poisoned the nearby river. According to the account, the entity that emerged stood over 30 feet tall, its skin like polished iron and its eyes emitting blue smoke. Villagers who approached it became sick. Animals fled. Children vanished. The being was said to stagger, make no sound, then collapse. Its body partially embedded in the rock, impossible to move. Shortly after, a procession of priests arrived, accompanied by soldiers. The scroll ends abruptly with a chilling note. We were told never to speak of the Sky Man again, and so we forgot, until the shaking returned. Most historians have either dismissed the scroll as a Hellenistic forgery or as an allegorical tale influenced by pre-Socratic myths of titans, but fragments of the scroll have been confirmed to date back to the classical period. Even more curious is the geological evidence in the same region. A 600-foot-wide impact crater outside modern-day Taman, Russia, which shows signs of high-pressure mineral deformation, a classic sign of a meteorite strike. Yet no known meteorite fragments were found in the crater. No iron, no nickel, nothing metallic at all. Only fused silica and a strange residue resembling scorched clay. Local oral traditions persist to this day. Tales of a sleeping god buried in the hillside, a place where compasses fail and where no vegetation grows. These were long dismissed as superstition, until a 2004 geological expedition reported electromagnetic interference and unexplained radiation spikes in the area. Adding to the mystery is an ancient Greek bas-relief found in a nearby temple ruin. It depicts a humanoid figure descending from a streak of flame in the sky, its limbs rigid, surrounded by villagers shielding their faces. The sculpture was carved decades after the scroll's described event and may have been a silent memorial, or a forbidden record. Could the giant have been an early observation of a spacecraft, or worse, its pilot? And if the body was never moved, is it still there, beneath layers of dirt and denial? The language of the scroll is unlike any other myth from the period. It is not poetic, it is not moralistic. It is descriptive, clinical even, as though it was written by someone trying to preserve not a legend, but a memory. If the scroll is authentic, and the event real, then the first contact with something not of this earth may not be a modern phenomenon. It may have happened in plain sight, and then, like so many truths before it, it was buried. The Roman Triple Sun. In 74 AD, the Roman historian Pliny the Elder recorded a celestial event in his natural history that defied both science and superstition. On a clear afternoon in northern Italy, near the town of Mediolanum, now Milan, citizens gathered to witness a phenomenon that would leave them speechless for generations. According to Pliny's account, 3 suns rose into the sky, burning equally bright and hung motionless for the length of a prayer. This was not metaphor. It was a documented observation by a respected Roman scholar whose writings formed part of the empire's official record. Pliny described the event with an air of detached precision. They stood arranged in a triangle, he wrote, casting shadows at opposing angles. The air warmed, but the winds died. Then, as one, they faded into mist. At first glance, this might seem like a rare atmospheric illusion, a known phenomenon called a parhelion, or sundog, caused by ice crystals refracting sunlight in high cirrus clouds. But the Roman record continues in ways modern meteorology cannot explain. A second account, uncovered in 1938 from the Annales Maximi, the state archive of the Roman Senate, notes that temples across the region were closed for days, with priests declaring the event a rupture in the order of the heavens. The report mentions that livestock refused to eat, birds circled the same radius for hours, and 2 watchtowers in the western province of Gaul caught fire without lightning or flame. The phenomenon lasted nearly 4 hours, far longer than any parhelion ever recorded, and was visible not only in Mediolanum, but reportedly as far south as the hills outside Rome. Even more puzzling is the reaction from Roman leadership. Emperor Vespasian ordered silence. All scrolls referring to triplicate suns were to be removed from state libraries. Witnesses were either ignored or reassigned. In one chilling note preserved in the private journal of a senator, the phrase appears, "The sky broke and we were told to forget." Centuries later, in 1571, Italian astronomer Giovanni Battista Riccioli referenced the triple sun of old when attempting to describe another mysterious event observed near the Alps. He compared it not to optical illusions, but to celestial engines opening new doors in the firmament. And still today, the Vatican archives reportedly hold a sealed section labeled Sol Triplex, AD 74, contents unknown. If this was simply an atmospheric trick, why did Roman authorities treat it as a theological crisis? Why did temples close and public discussion cease? Why were copies of the record hidden, some only rediscovered by accident nearly 2,000 years later? One possibility remains. What the Romans witnessed that day was not a trick of light, but a fracture in their reality, a glimpse of something layered behind the sky they thought they knew. And if their records are right, it did not rise. It appeared. The Tibetan thunder wheels. In 826 AD, within the remote cliffside monastery of Sami, the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet, monks uncovered an older set of texts hidden in a sealed copper chest beneath the library floor. Written in a pre-Bon script known to only a few initiates, the parchment was brittle, its ink faded, but its message rang with terrifying clarity. It spoke of the Drong Thal, translated loosely as the wheels that roar, said to have been used in the time before kings. Devices that could summon thunder without clouds and shake mountains without touch. The manuscript described a sacred ritual known only to high initiates. When performed atop designated mountain plateaus, the Drong Thal would be activated by aligning with specific star constellations, focusing sound through conical horns and polished metallic chambers. Once triggered, the device would emit a deep, resonant vibration, a pulse so intense that it could split stone, shatter trees, and render birds flightless. According to the text, entire valleys were once flattened not by war, but by the misaligned activation of these thunder wheels. Their use was eventually forbidden, deemed too powerful to remain in mortal hands. The devices, or perhaps blueprints of them, were sealed in stone vaults within the Himalayas, guarded by silence and snow. Modern interpretations vary. Some scholars believe the texts refer to symbolic thunder, a metaphor for spiritual awakening or inner power, but others argue that the descriptions are too physical, too specific. The parchments note exact acoustic frequencies, geometric diagrams of the conical devices, and warnings about directional use. One passage even cautions, "Point not the wheel toward the valley unless you wish to unmake what the gods have formed." In 1968, during a covert high-altitude research mission, Chinese military engineers documented unexplained seismic activity near Langtang, Nepal, a region once home to Bon ceremonial platforms. No faults ran through the area, yet boulders the size of oxen had been split cleanly in half, without signs of impact or pressure. Later expeditions to nearby caverns unearthed bell-shaped bronze artifacts with unusual engravings, rings of overlapping sine waves and star maps centered on the constellation Draco. While these artifacts remain classified by local authorities, photographic leaks in 1993 sparked a wave of speculation about acoustic weaponry in ancient times. Curiously, modern acoustic research confirms that low-frequency sound waves, infrasound, can cause nausea, disorientation, or even internal bleeding at sustained exposure. In military testing, directed sonic devices have been developed that match certain patterns described in the manuscript, but no known modern device can generate effects on the scale described in these ancient texts. If the Tibetan thunder machines were real, who built them? And why were they eventually hidden and forgotten? Were they remnants of a lost technology? One based not on fire or metal, but on resonance and geometry. The silence around these texts remains near total. The monks who uncovered them reportedly resealed the chest and swore never to copy or translate it. Yet rumors persist that a partial transcription made it to a private archive in Lhasa, now off-limits to all foreign researchers. If sound alone could level mountains, then what else have we overlooked in the ancient science of vibration? The Giants of Qumran. In 1947, in the limestone caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea, Bedouin shepherds stumbled upon one of the most explosive archaeological finds in human history, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them, buried beneath layers of dust and neglect, lay fragmented parchments that scholars would spend decades deciphering. But one scroll stood out, a text that even the most cautious academics admitted had no counterpart in any known religious doctrine. It was called the Book of Giants. Unlike the other scrolls, which focused on law, prophecy, or ritual, the Book of Giants detailed events from a time when beings known as the Nephilim walked the earth. These were not men, nor were they gods. They were described as the offspring of watchers, entities who descended from the sky and took human women, creating a race of unnatural hybrids. The giants were said to be enormous, capable of feats beyond human strength, but plagued by inner torment and uncontrollable rage. What made the text so disturbing was its tone. It was not mythic or poetic. It read like a confession. The giants speak of dreams in which a great tablet was submerged in water and dissolved, and in which a tree was uprooted from earth and thrown into the void. These images are interpreted by angelic beings as divine judgment, a flood meant to erase the corruption they brought. But deeper into the fragments, the scroll becomes more specific. One section describes a moment when the Nephilim looked to the sky and saw the gates close and the watchers retreat to the upper realm. Another tells of a gathering in which they attempt to build a tower of sound to call them back. These passages suggest a technological or energetic understanding far beyond simple stone and fire. Some scholars believe the giants' knowledge included astronomy, metallurgy, and weaponry. Hints that they not only lived among humans, but also accelerated early technological development. Others argue that these were cautionary tales meant to illustrate divine boundaries. But the physical descriptions are detailed. One fragment mentions limbs like bronze pillars and a voice that cracked the earth. The scroll ends abruptly. No full narrative survives, but the implication is unmistakable. These beings were not destroyed by war or time. They were erased. The Vatican has never publicly commented on the Book of Giants. Neither has Israel's Antiquities Authority released the full transcription of several related fragments. Why? If these texts are purely myth, why do they echo across cultures, from the Nephilim of Hebrew lore to the Titans of Greece and the Asuras of India? Why does every civilization remember a time when beings came from the sky, disrupted the natural order, and were cast down? And if such beings once existed, what was truly lost in their disappearance? Knowledge, power, a connection to something or someone beyond Earth? Or worse, are the giants not a myth from the past, but a warning of what could return? The Maya Sky War. In the heart of Guatemala's highlands, carved into volcanic stone and later transcribed by 16th century missionaries, the Popol Vuh stands as the sacred creation text of the Quiché Maya. Most view it as a mythic narrative, a blend of cosmology and folklore, but buried deep within its chapters is a passage that diverges sharply from metaphor and ritual. It recounts a battle in the sky. According to the Popol Vuh, a war was waged above the earth between two factions, the lords of Xibalba, gods of the underworld, and celestial beings aligned with light. The account describes great fires that cut through the heavens, serpents of smoke, and thunder that shook the trees from their roots. At one point, the sky tore open, revealing a mirror that showed the end of the world. One passage recounts that the rivers turned to ash, and the stones beneath the mountains wept. Entire forests were said to ignite without flame. Crops blackened in minutes. Villagers who looked up into the divided sky fell to the ground screaming, blinded not by sunlight, but by something far more violent. What makes these descriptions extraordinary is not just their vividness, but their specificity. The Quiché had no words for advanced weaponry, no language for aircraft or missiles. Yet the text references spears of Skyfire, beings wrapped in humming shells, and a roar that came before the flash. These aren't the tools of gods. They resemble the echoes of technological warfare. Some modern researchers have interpreted the account as a distant memory of a celestial impact event, perhaps a comet or meteor breaking apart in the atmosphere. However, the text clearly presents it as a conflict, not a natural disaster. There is intent behind the destruction, strategy, retaliation. Adding to the mystery is a series of pre-Columbian glyphs discovered in the ruined city of El Mirador, just north of the Quiche region. These carvings, dated to 300 BC, show figures in the sky, enclosed in ovals, emitting what appear to be beams toward the ground. Surrounding them are images of fleeing people, twisted trees, and spiraling clouds. The inscriptions offer no clear explanation, only more questions. Spanish priests who translated the Popol Vuh reportedly struggled with these passages. In some versions, entire segments describing the Sky War were omitted or altered. One Franciscan friar described the story as too dangerous for public minds. His annotated margin note simply reads, diabolical or true, too vivid to dismiss. Today, few mainstream historians address this section of the Popol Vuh. It is treated as allegory, but its parallels to other ancient war in the sky narratives, from the Vedic texts of India to the Norse myths of Ragnarok, suggest something more universal, perhaps a memory shared across continents. If the Maya were remembering a real conflict, who were the combatants? Why was the Earth affected by what happened in the heavens? And if this was merely myth, why does it still feel like eyewitness testimony? The Chinese Skyfire record. In the 4th century BC, a set of ancient Chinese chronicles known as the Zhushu Jinian, or Bamboo Annals, was unearthed from a royal tomb in the state of Wei. Etched onto slender bamboo strips and preserved for centuries in lacquered cases, the text offers a detailed chronology of early dynasties. But buried among the records of coronations and floods lies a singular entry that has baffled historians ever since. The record states that during the reign of Emperor Yao, a semi-mythical ruler traditionally dated to 2356 BC, a fire came from the sky, roaring like 1,000 dragons, lighting the day into night. It goes on to say that a silver object tore through the clouds, fell to the earth with a cry like thunder, and split the mountain like a melon. The surrounding land blackened, and the air itself turned to ash. Unlike typical omens or astrological warnings common in early Chinese texts, this account does not contain metaphor or ritual interpretation. It is observational, measured. It ends with a haunting line. A figure emerged from the fire, pale as bone, and silent as stone. The people did not approach. For years, the passage was dismissed as allegory, perhaps an embellished tale of a meteorite impact or volcanic eruption. But recent geological surveys in the Loess Plateau, near present-day Shaanxi province, have revealed something stranger. Satellite imaging and core samples have identified a massive elliptical crater buried beneath centuries of sediment. The composition of the impact zone shows vitrified quartz and traces of high-energy plasma discharge, not typically associated with natural meteorite impacts. Chinese archaeologist Zhang Wenxiu, in a 2007 private report later leaked online, described the area as showing electromagnetic anomalies, an absence of organic life, and soil properties consistent with high-frequency radiation exposure. His team found fragments of metallic compounds not native to the region, including a silvery alloy that resisted corrosion even after prolonged exposure to acid. Local legends surrounding the site add another layer of mystery. For over 2,000 years, villagers have warned of the white man from the sky, a being they describe as silent, eyeless, and shrouded in light. The area is still considered cursed. No animals graze there. Compasses spin wildly, and attempts to build roads through the region have consistently failed due to unexplained machinery malfunctions. Adding to the enigma is an ancient bronze disc found in a nearby tomb, engraved with spiraling patterns and star charts aligned not with Earth's current sky, but with a celestial configuration from over 10,000 years ago. Some believe it was left behind to mark the event, or the visitor. If the Bamboo Annals truly describe a visitation, not just a cosmic impact, then it may be one of the earliest written records of an encounter with something not of this Earth. And if a figure did step from that burning sky, as the text insists, who was it meant for? The Norse Black Sun. Sometime between the 10th and 11th centuries AD, in the windswept fjords of Iceland, an anonymous skald composed one of the most haunting prophecies in Old Norse literature. It was called the Völuspá, or the Prophecy of the Seeress, and it forms the opening poem of the Poetic Edda, a foundational text of Norse mythology. Most know it for its apocalyptic vision of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, but hidden within its verses is a far more cryptic account, the coming of the Black Sun. The passage in question reads, "The sun turns black, earth sinks in the sea, hot stars rain down from the sky, steam rises in fire, high flame licks heaven itself." To some, this is the poetic rendering of a volcanic eruption, but scholars who specialize in Norse cosmology note that the language differs from traditional metaphor. The text goes on to say, "Then shall a hall be raised of gold, brighter than the sun, and from it shall descend the watchers of time, cloaked in ice and fire." What is most disturbing, however, is a seldom translated stanza, omitted in many modern versions, in which the seeress describes a moment when the sky shattered like brittle stone, and a mouth opened above the pole. She speaks of a creature of metal and hunger that slithered through the breach, its eyes like suns, its breath cold enough to still time. This imagery appears nowhere else in Norse myth. It does not correspond to gods, monsters, or giants. It reads like an intrusion, something foreign to the mythological system. The text describes a shadow that falls across the 9 realms, not cast by a god, but by a thing without name, older than the first frost. In 1904, during a translation effort by Norwegian linguist Olav Jorgensen, a marginal note was discovered in an older vellum copy of the Völuspá. It read simply, "These lines are not of the poet, they are from before," the implication being that certain stanzas predate even the mythos they were folded into, possibly fragments of oral memory preserved from an earlier, forgotten age. Modern astronomical interpretations have attempted to link the Black Sun to a solar eclipse, perhaps paired with a meteor storm or volcanic winter. But this explanation fails to account for the vivid references to time distortion, metal creatures, and watchers from a golden hall. If it were merely mythic symbolism, why is it so mechanically detailed? Furthermore, magnetic anomalies have been recorded around Snæfellsjökull, the glacier-capped volcano often associated with the Norse underworld. Compasses deviate, birds refuse to nest, and at least 2 expeditions have reported sensory hallucinations while camping near its crater rim. Local folklore calls the area the mouth of the deep sky, a phrase eerily aligned with the seeress's vision. If the Black Sun was a poetic metaphor for natural disaster, why include elements of artificial structure, machinery, and beings that descend from light? And if it was not metaphor, what was it? The prophecy ends not with salvation, but with silence. The seeress offers no hope, only the return of something ancient, something the gods themselves feared. Perhaps the gods did not fall in Ragnarok. Perhaps they fled. Conclusion. Across cultures and epochs, these ancient texts present a recurring enigma, not through invention, but through description. Whether etched into clay, pressed into bamboo, or whispered through epic verse, each document quietly captures an event that, by all logic, should not have occurred within its era. Vessels in the sky, battles above the clouds, machines of sound, beings not entirely human. The accounts are too detailed, too specific, and too widespread to be dismissed as coincidence. Rather than viewing these stories purely as mythology, a more grounded approach considers them as cultural memory, filtered through language, belief, and time. When stripped of symbolism, the underlying narratives point to encounters with phenomena beyond the technological or scientific reach of their age. These were not explanations. They were records. That so many of these texts have been downplayed, altered, or excluded from mainstream historical discourse may say less about their validity and more about our discomfort in re-examining accepted frameworks. The past, in its full complexity, often resists simplicity, and these writings, whatever their origin, complicate the timeline we've come to accept. We may never fully understand what these civilizations witnessed, but dismissing their accounts outright risks losing more than just perspective. It risks erasing the questions they tried to preserve, not to provoke, not to sensationalize, but perhaps simply to remember. And that in itself might be the most human act of all.